Absolutely. I want to talk about your background. Now, you note that later in your career, you started more than 30 years ago, I think, by joining the U.S. Army, and you said, quote, that you were requested into various programs within the military intelligence, managing and directing things like counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, counter-espionage, counter-insurgency. During this course of this work, this sort of portfolio, were you part of the ground branch of the CIA's Special Activities Center, formerly known as the Special Activities Division? And if so, were any of these missions tasked with the recovery of craft of non-human origin?
Wow. So, boy, that's a heck of a question. I think if you want to know if any work I've done with the Central Intelligence Agency, beyond my W-2s, I would recommend asking the CIA. I am not going to go into any detail here of any type of mission specifics I might or might not have done with either the CIA or the Department of Defense. It's one of those things that I think is if people want to know what I do, of course, I keep all my performance evaluations. They've all been nothing but excellent and outstanding from day one. Never had anything less than that. But it's important that I don't want to discuss anything that I shouldn't.
Okay. The next thing, I want to show you a graphic, and I want to get your comment on this. This is how I understand sort of how everything happened in the Obama administration. That basically James Lacatski was in the Legacy Program. He brought you into the Legacy Program, and essentially both Lacatski and you sort of lived in an overlap between AAWSAP and the Legacy Program, and that this was essentially sort of a limited hangout during the Obama administration, where in part basically the National Security Council and within factions within the Deep Legacy Program were essentially wanted to disclose aspects of the UAP issue to the public up to a certain point. Is that something that you can comment on? Were you part of the Deep Legacy Program? Was this a limited hangout?
So I can't speak on behalf of Jim Lacatski, and I won't. So if you want to know what Jim Lacatski's how he worked and what capacity, you'd have to ask Jim, especially as regards to the Legacy Program. I was brought in specifically initially to look at the counterintelligence and security apparatus of the then AAWSAP program, which then for me in 2010 really started to focus more on the AATIP side, the nuts and bolts of UAP, and less on the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. Now, I want to preface this. It doesn't mean that stuff wasn't going on. It was. And the AAWSAP folks continued doing what they were doing. But we inside the Department of Defense, where I was, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, began to really focus on these incursions that were occurring into controlled U.S. airspace, and they were of unknown origin, right? And they were performing maneuvers in a way that, frankly, we didn't understand nor could we replicate. And so that was really my focus, more from a national security perspective. I cannot speak as far as what a limited I don't know what limited hangout means. I hear that term thrown around a lot, so forgive me. But if you can explain to me what that means, and then I can maybe help you with that understanding.
So my understanding of it was that it was in AATIP, in certain aspects of it were to essentially, you had factions within the Legacy Program, factions that felt, we need to let some of this out. And part of one of the elements of AATIP was to sort of peel away some of the layers of the onion, but this was done in coordination with the Obama administration. This was part of something that came out of the National Security Council, and in particular James Clapper. So can you speak to that? And again, were you ever or are you part of the Legacy Program?
Well, I worked with Jim Clapper. Actually, I worked for Jim Clapper, as a lot of people know, when he was Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, after he was the director there at DIA, but before he was the Director of National Intelligence. And I can't speak for Jim. He would have to answer that to you. But what I'll tell you, at least when I spoke to him, he was very happy and that we had a UAP program in the department. Now that doesn't mean anything. If you ask him now, he may be think otherwise, but that's certainly up to former Director Clapper to opine about. As far as where this comes from Obama, I never sat with Obama specifically about this topic or this any other topic. My entree point was through the National Security Council for the programs that I was running in the special access world. Unfortunately, I probably wouldn't be able to elaborate too much on how that relationship works. There is an established channel of communication that was between my office and that office. But much beyond that, I wouldn't be able to really provide any fidelity to. We especially not just with classified information, but special access programs. There's a huge sensitivity there. And especially when you're talking about SAPs in some cases, and by the way, I'm not saying this is one of them, if they're unacknowledged, right? That's even more sensitive. So, boy, I don't know how to answer that question. It's a good question. I can't speak on behalf of Jim Clapper or Barack Obama or Jim Lacatski, and I won't. I can only speak for me, and I can tell you what my observations were. Sitting at the Pentagon and we had another location that I can't really go into detail with, was for me, there was a clear and present danger that we had with these objects that were coming in and had the potential to interfere with our nuclear equities, certainly interested in our nuclear equities. And we were pretty certain that they were also interested in foreign adversarial technology, right? And so, what are coming into our test ranges, and how are they coming in unchallenged, and how come we can't detect them till we see them? And then how come they can perform the maneuvers that they're doing? How is that possible? And what are they interested in, right? And capabilities versus intent. That's how we understand if something is a national security threat. It's very simple. You have capabilities versus intent. And we've seen some of the capabilities, but we have no idea the intent. And so, there lies the delta in our information. We call it an information gap or an intelligence gap that we need to start filling. And so that was my motivation.
Understood. Can you speak as to whether there were any other people in the Obama administration besides James Clapper that were supportive of moving forward on this UAP issue?
Yeah, but I don't want to discuss that publicly because those individuals, haven't given me permission to and also what capacity they were serving, right? Yeah, they were. Sure. We had people that were in multiple agencies and other higher ups that were supportive of this. I mean, I've mentioned it specifically that the White House liaison had been briefed on this topic and was actually helping us try to find some more senior people in the department to lead this effort. This was the whole Neil Tipton issue. Yes, there were people that were informed and involved, but who those people were until they decided to come forward, I can't say. It's just like with Jim Lacatski, right? For years, everybody was throwing arrows at me, and Jim made a decision to become public and finally, explain, his part of AAWSAP. But I never threw anybody in the bus or provided any names of somebody who could, vouch or verify or validate what I'm saying until they were ready. And I am still that way now. I don't throw people under the bus just to save my own skin. If there's one thing people know about me, that's very sacred to me.
One of the things that James Clapper said, he said, quote, "I don't know why we haven't been more transparent about this in the past. I'm part of that crime, I guess. I didn't insist on more transparency with respect to this issue." Do you think that there are folks in Clapper's position and elsewhere that, sort of looking back on their involvement in this issue, perhaps wish they had done things different and not sort of maybe not necessarily directly played a part, but maybe how they may have handled things could have put us in a different position in terms of where we're at right now?
Of course. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. The things that I could have done better and should have done better, right? I'm the first one to criticize myself. There's things that I could have done looking back, which is a luxury that many of us don't really have until it's too late. There's things that I certainly could have done better and should have done differently. All we can do is learn from those lessons, those mistakes, and move forward. There are people, yes, I know people for sure that have very senior people who said, man, I wish I would have been a little bit more open with this topic or maybe a little more proactive. But, I don't hold it against them, because every single day I look at myself in the mirror and say, there are things I could have done better, or I could have done perhaps more effectively. So yeah, sure. If there's a blame game out there, I would say, look, it starts with me, that holding yourself accountable. Look, I've always told everybody, Matt, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes all the time, and all I can do is hold myself accountable. I'm the very first person if I make a mistake within 24 hours, I try to remedy that mistake. Unlike a lot of other people out there that like to throw barbs and throw monkey poo at you. When they're wrong, they'll never apologize. They'll never publicly say, oh, I was wrong, or I apologize. Right there, they'll just go on to the next thing, and they're okay tarnishing your name. I'm the first one to come out and always say every time, if I've made a mistake, here's how I made the mistake, and here's how it won't happen again. And hopefully that same mistake doesn't happen again. And if it does, hold myself accountable to that again, right? That's all we can do. But pretending that we don't make mistakes, that for me is more worrisome, because everybody makes mistakes. Everybody, especially when you're fighting the dragon every single day, you have to beat that dragon every single day or it eats you. It only has to eat you once and you're gone. Right. So, we have to do a better job of holding ourselves accountable. And that's something that I strive to do every single day. So I'm not going to throw mud on anybody else. Yes, I'm sure there are people out there that wish they would have done things differently, but hey, I'm I'm the leader of that club. I'm not just the owner. I'm a client, right?